this video, we'll look at some of the various settings that you can apply to various assessments. So, first of all, if you've imported an assessment from a template course, generally the settings there are set pretty well, and basically all you need to do is change the due date. However, you're free to change settings as you please, and if you create a new assessment, then you're definitely going to want to change the settings. So to get to the settings, you just click on the gear icon next to an assessment, and then press the settings link. So if you do that, it's going to pull open a big page. There's a summary where you can type in some information that'll show on your course homepage. You can enter some intro and instructions, which is going to show at the top of the assignment when the student opens the assignment. And then you've got due dates, which we've already covered, so you can set due dates from the assessment page. And then you get down into some of the other settings for assessments. Now, if you want to copy all of the options from another assessment, that's the first little drop down from this section. So you can select one of those and just copy the settings right over, which is pretty nice if you have set some settings and you really just want to copy those over into a new assessment. Now, there are some core options. So some core options there. One of them is to require a password. If you don't want a password, just don't put anything there. But you can password protect an assessment, which is useful for things like maybe quizzes or tests if you want to kind of lock it behind a password. There's a time limit. If you want to set some kind of time limit, you can do that there. A lot of assignments don't use that, so if you don't want a time limit, just leave it at 0. An important one is display method. Now, there's a handful of options for display method. A lot of these you probably don't want to use, realistically. The important ones are skip around, which means the student can jump from question to question. There will be like a sidebar where they can choose which question to work on. There's embedded, which is commonly used, which basically embeds all of the questions into a single web page. And so the students can see all of them and work on them in whatever order they want, which kind of emulates what paper homework might look like. Video queued, you can play around with that if you want to embed videos and then ask questions within the video. And then there's the live poll display method, which I'll cover in another video, which is like kind of like clicker questions or a polling feature. A lot of times embedded is a good option for assessments. Default points per problem, usually leave that at 1, although you can change that if you want. That's how many points each question is worth by default. There's default attempts per problem. So if you want students to only have like 5 attempts, you would enter 5 here. If you want them to be able to attempt it as many times as they want, leave that at 0. Now there's a default penalty, and this means you can penalize students based on incorrect attempts. You have some options here. So in this assessment, it's set to 10% per missed attempt after 5. And so this basically means the student gets 5 free attempts, and then each missed attempt after 5, they get docked 10% of their max score, which basically means up to attempt 5, they can get 100% of the points for that question. And then after that, the max score is 90% per question. And then after that, 80% on that question, and so on. Feedback method. Show score on each question. This is the default and usually the one you want to use, but there's some other options there that you can select from. Show answers is another option that has a lot on there where you can show it after a certain number of attempts or some other options there. You can read through there, but the after due date and in gradebook is usually the one that you'll want to use, and that's the default one. Use equation helper. I recommend always setting this to MathQuill advanced form, which basically gives like a visual editor for entering answers. This just helps student enter answers, and there's not much reason to turn that off. And then you have some show ask questions links, and these appear at the bottom of the question. And if you want students to easily message you about questions, check the show message instructor. If you want them to be able to post questions to a forum, then select the second option and select which forum you would like them to post to. Now, show answer entry tips. I would advise putting yes under answer box. That's the default and a useful one that just gives students some tips about how to enter their answers. There's late pass options, which basically allow students to complete assignments after the due date based on some settings there. I'll cover that in another video. If you don't want students to use that, just press none. There's a gradebook category, so which category you want this assignment to go to in the gradebook. That's an important one. So to categorize your assignments. And then you can choose if you want it to count in the gradebook or not. And there are some other options here, like the last one in the core options is calendar icon. And so active, this question mark here is what shows up on the calendar when the assignment is active. And so if you change this to something like, I'm just going to put EXPR for expressions. If you change that, that's what's going to show on the calendar when this assignment is due. Now there are some advanced options here that I'm not going to cover. You can go in and look through some of these if you'd like. I guess the only one I will cover is show based on another assessment. So you have the option to essentially lock assignments down until a student has completed a different assignment. So you can show grade until a score of some number of points or some percentage is obtained on some other lesson. So one common feature in some of the online lessons is to basically hide the homeworks until the student has completed 70% of the corresponding lesson. So that's an option there. And then when you're done with all of this, make sure to press the Save Changes button at the very bottom of the page, and that'll save all of your settings for that assignment. If you want to change the settings for multiple assessments at once, look over to the left-hand side, the left sidebar, and then under the Mass Change section, there's a link that says Assessments. So if you select Assessments, it'll show you a list of all of the assessments in your course, and you can select various assessments from there. You can even filter by gradebook category. And then you can make the same settings changes that I just showed, but it'll apply it to all of the assessments that you picked from the list up here. So if you wanted to change like the gradebook category for a handful of things, you could change the gradebook category, but make sure you select this checkbox on the left-hand side to make that row green. Otherwise, it won't save that setting. And once you do that, you can press Save or Apply Changes, and that'll change those settings for all of the assessments that you have selected from that list. This can be a quick way to make large-scale changes across the course. Now, one last thing I'd like to point out before ending this video is some of these settings cannot be changed after students have started an assessment. So make sure that you have these settings pretty well set before you make them visible to students and students start working on them. Once students have started working on an assignment, there are certain things that you just cannot change about the assignment unless you wipe all of the students' attempts on that assignment, which is something you generally do not want to do. So make sure these are set ahead of time. Maybe hide it until you have your settings set and then open it up to be visible by students.